lecture is to help figure out this stuff that's going on between Descartes and Elizabeth and to better understand the metaphysics behind the question, what type of critter or creature are we? Now, I use the word critter because the word creature implies that we are created, right? If we say creature, we imply that something's created, which is to beg the question somewhat. So I'm using the word critter here to help resist that temptation. But Descartes and Elizabeth, in their correspondences, are having this argument over the answer to the question, what type of critter are we? Of course, they would like this view called substance dualism to be true. And so Elizabeth is pushing Descartes on what this looks like. What sort of story explanation can we give to answer some questions that pop up when you're a substance dualist? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Now, substance dualism is explicated by Descartes in the Meditations. And it's the view that the mind and the body are different substances. So the mind is a thinking substance, and it's immaterial. Okay? So like as a substance, the mind is this thinking immaterial substance, and the body is this extended material substance. And so when we say that, so when Descartes says that these are different substances, what he means is that their essence is different. So the essence of the mind is that it's a thinking thing, and he uses the language primitive notion in the letters here. So the primitive power of the mind is that it's a thinking thing. The primitive power of the body is that it's an extended thing. So the mind is immaterial, the body is material. And in fact, these are distinct substances, two substances. So the answer to what type of critter are we is that we are mind and body, and these are not substances that mix. They do interact, but they don't mix, right? So the body and the mind can't change the essential features of the other. So the body can't make the mind a material thing, and the mind can't make the body an immaterial thing. And basically, it's this mind, right? The soul, right? Because remember, soul and mind are the same thing for Descartes. That makes us the individual human that we are. Now, this tracks really well with theology, Christian theology, if this is something that matters to you. And it's why Descartes is making this sort of argument. Now, what is very important is that the mind should affect the body, right? So if your mind wants to do something, it should have the power to interact with the body in such a way that the body does what the mind says. Conversely, and Descartes talks about this, if the body is, for instance, thirsty, it's not going to have the thought that it's thirsty, but it's somehow going to convey to the mind that it should drink something. And this is going to get Descartes into some trouble. This body affecting the mind story is going to get Descartes in trouble with Elizabeth. She's going to say, doesn't that imply that the body has thought? And she's going to say this in the second to last letter from her. So the issue, there's a lot of issues, but the one that we're going to focus on is how do they interact? Right, and this is Elizabeth's critique. It's why she keeps asking, like, okay, in order for the body, for the mind to move something, it has this. In order for something to move something, it has to have a set of features. The mind lacks these features. Like, for instance, it lacks extension, it lacks materiality. It's this immaterial thing. It doesn't have surface properties. How is it causing the body to move if it lacks these features? Conversely, how does the body cause the mind to move, right? If the body lacks thought, right? Because the body seems to be affected by other bodies in the same way that, in one way, right? So like if a car hits you, you're going to go with where the car sends you, right? And that's easy to explain. Bodies affect other bodies through the way that extension and the surface properties of those objects operate. But if you're just sitting there, the body will just sit there until it's moved, and it's going to be moved by another body or by the mind. But occasionally the body does things and it moves. For instance, you react to fire, you move away from the fire. That seems to require thought or intelligence of some sort. And that doesn't jive with Descartes' conception of the body. The body lacks thought, right? These two things, mind and body, do not share attributes. They don't share modes. So the mind is solely responsible for thinking, or the soul is solely responsible for thinking. The body is this extended thing. And another worry we might have is, why have a body in the first place? If we're the soul, that's what all we are, and we're trying to have an explanation of how the body can break down and die and the soul go on. Why have this? And if you don't accept certain theological views, this is going to be a tough question to answer. Why have a body at all if what we are essentially, and Descartes makes this claim, essentially we're thinking things? Why have a body? Another view that you could have about the mind and the body, about what type of critter we are, is that we're just one thing, a mind or a body. Problematically, we think we have a body and we think we have a mind. We think these two things are distinct. This isn't always the case. This is an intuition we have. Other cultures lack this intuition. They have different intuitions about what sort of thing we are. And we probably have this intuition due to a mix of Descartes' influence and the Catholic Church's influence. So, or, Christianity's influence more generally. Another issue, though, again, if you care about theology and theological implications, is the soul and the mind, or the mind, these are sort of the same thing. This needs to be distinct. It needs to not be the body, because the body dies. The mind does not. Something needs to be us that survives death in order for the whole salvation story to be plausible, right? Metaphysically speaking, there are objections to this view that follow along with the same objections that this embodied view has. So embodied, it's not necessarily a view of like body and mind. It's a conception of mind that it's necessarily embodied, right? The body can't exist on its, like, as a thing without consciousness, and the consciousness can't exist as this thing without a body. It essentially, experiences and the way we navigate the world are informed by our embodiment. So there's a problem here. And the evil demon works. This thought experiment called the brain in the vat also works. And again, this sort of objection also applies to the idea that maybe we're just one substance. So the evil demon thing is that you could be deceived by an evil demon. The brain in the vat thing is that, okay, you could just be a brain inside a vat. So your entire experience of the world around you, of your past and of your future, like, these are all just electrical impulses given to you by some crazy scientist or something like that, right? So the idea here is that your conscious experiences, right, could be the result of something that does not require physical embodiment. And this is an issue that Descartes tries to solve with the substance dualism that both this just one thing view and this embodiment view have. Right, so we need some sort of answer that says, okay, this isn't a problem. Here's a potential response, right? So the idea behind the brain in the vat thought experiment, which I'll give you guys a link to, is that your brain is just getting electrical impulses, and certain changes in neurotransmitters are what result in certain experiences and certain inputs. And so, like, when you see something, not actually like the light's reflecting in a particular way, but your brain is making sense of electrical impulses, right? And so the idea here is that all your experiences bottom out in physical inputs. So this is a view called physicalism in the philosophy of mind. Now, the issue is that, yeah, we know that these physical impulses, for instance, I'm in pain, is the result of C fibers firing in a particular way. Sure. Okay. But we know this for a lot of things, right? So we know that valence electrons determine how individual atoms of elements interact with themselves and with each other. And from there, we get compounds. And from there, we can get biological things. So for instance, we know that salt and potassium interact in particular ways to produce electrical impulses. And at the biological level, this results in sodium ion channels. These are the things that make your muscles contract. And then at the body level, at the organism level, you get communication between the brain and the muscle to contract in particular ways, so that, for instance, you can walk, or you can jump, or you can do certain, or you can eat, right? The problem is that just looking at the chemical level, right? If we look at just the atoms, the subatomic level to the atomic level to the biological level to the organism as a whole, these things don't look at all similar, right? There's nothing at the atomic level that predicts what will happen at the biological level, what that will actually look like. So the point here that I'm trying to make is there's no one-to-one level change, right? Just because sodium and potassium operate in the way they do, and we can make predictions about electrical flow based on that, doesn't tell us anything about why sodium ion channels are the particular method for contracting muscles. And there's no story about how sodium ion channels, being the way they are, gives us a whole organism level explanation for how, for instance, consciousness comes about. So this worry that there's no one-to-one explanation between how we go from the subatomic to the atomic to the biologic to the whole organism, this is a worry, right? For objections to this view. So I'll give you an example. You can put me in a brain in a vat, give me all these electrical impulses to make me think that I'm somewhere in space, but how does this at all look like proprioception, right? Which is this is the sense that allows you to locate yourself in space. It tells you where your limbs are. It tells you how far away from your body your limbs are. So for instance, you know, if you put your left hand out, that your left hand is at the end of itself. And you know this because of proprioception. In fact, proprioception is something you can lose. It can be better or worse. And so, for instance, how much force you need to use in order to throw a ball is a matter of proprioception. And a lot of people on the autism spectrum disorder, or on the autism disorder spectrum, struggle with proprioception. So how do you go from electrical impulses, for instance, to proprioception? There's not a really good story about that. And as long as that's out there, you can maybe make an argument that, okay, just because electrical impulses are how we get our sensory experiences doesn't mean that there's a one-to-one translation between electrical impulses and our experiences. Maybe there's some room for some other sort of explanations. A final view I want to consider. Now, this isn't every view out there, and a lot of these views actually overlap. So for instance, substance dualism is a form of hylomorphism. Embodiment is a form of hylomorphism. So I don't mean to imply that these are exactly distinct views. They're just different ways of conceiving of an answer to this problem. And they're not exhaustive. There are other views out there. So hylomorphism is this view that we're the physical material informed by something like a soul. So the way that Aristotle talks about this, it's form plus matter. And these are actually types of causes, but don't worry about that. So whatever physical material we're made up of, plus whatever informs us is, informed here is ENFORMED. So not informed like I am informed by a criminal informant, but informed as in I get to be the type of thing I am because of this form. So there's a distinction, again, between matter and whatever the form is. However, you don't become a human, for instance, until you're informed by the form of a human, right? In this case, it would be something like soul, maybe, or mind. There's a lot of problems with this view. For instance, just strict hylomorphism, as Aristotle describes it. You don't have dead things, you have potentially alive things. So when something dies and it no longer has its form, but it still has its matter, it's just a potentially alive thing. Another thing is, you know, if our souls survive us, right? So we're this is very clear, right? We're form plus matter. So we, the thing we are, is these two things together. So if form survives us after death, then it is not us. It is something that could become us if it had the right matter, but it lacks that. So from a theological perspective, this is concerning because you don't have an explanation. You don't have a story you can tell about how something can survive death and still be you. And if you don't have those theological considerations, you maybe still have this worry about what this thing that is the form, what it actually is, how it interacts with matter. There's still a lot of questions to ask about that. So again, I know we're at the 15-minute mark and we're losing concentration, but Elizabeth and Descartes, they want substance dualism to work out. And so what Elizabeth is saying is, all right, make it make sense. And she doesn't think Descartes does a good job.